The Galactic Council chamber stretched wide and tall, filled with representatives from hundreds of different worlds. The air hummed with translation devices as species of every shape and size communicated across the vast hall. At the center platform stood Ambassador Vexnar of the Krolathi Empire, his forearms crossed over his armored chest, his mandibles clicking in what his species considered a smile. He had just made an announcement that caused the entire chamber to fall into stunned silence. Earth would be invaded within the next cycle. The small blue planet on the outer rim of the galaxy had refused to pay the tribute demanded by the Empire, and now they would face the consequences. The Krolathi battle fleet, 200 warships strong, would descend upon the primitive human world and teach them the price of defiance. It was a simple matter, really, hardly worth the full council's attention, but Vexnar enjoyed making examples of those who thought they could refuse the Empire. Thora of the Venetian Alliance shifted in her floating seat. She was a counselor of considerable experience, having served in the diplomatic corps for over 60 standard years. She had made it her business to study the various species that inhabited the galaxy, including the newcomers from Earth. The humans were young, barely 200 years into space travel, with only a handful of colonies in their own star system. They had no energy shields to speak of. Their weapons were primitive projectile-based systems, and their fastest ships couldn't even achieve light speed without using the ancient jump gates that dotted the galaxy. By any measure, they were defenseless against a force like the Krolathi Empire. But something bothered Thora about this situation. She had read the reports on human history, and what she found there disturbed her in ways she couldn't quite explain. These humans had spent the last 10,000 years doing nothing but fighting each other. Their entire civilization seemed built on conflict, war, and an almost pathological refusal to surrender even when defeat was certain. Still, she was just one voice on a council of hundreds, and the Krolathi had made their decision. Thora spoke up, her voice translator projecting her words across the chamber. "This seems unnecessary," she said carefully. "They are not a threat to the Empire. Perhaps economic sanctions would be more appropriate than military action. The humans are new to the galactic community and may simply need more time to understand how things work out here." Vexnar's mandibles clicked louder, a sound his species made when amused. "The decision is made, Counselor Thora. Our fleet departs within the cycle. Let this serve as a lesson to all worlds that would deny the Empire what is rightfully owed. The humans will learn, as so many others have learned before them, that defiance carries a steep price." The council session ended shortly after, and Thora returned to her quarters feeling uneasy. She pulled up the human files again, scrolling through the history of their violent little world. She read about something called World War II, where over 70 million humans died fighting each other. She read about Vietnam, where a technologically superior force was ground down by determined resistance. She read about Afghanistan, a place where empires went to die. The more she read, the more worried she became. But what could she do? The Krolathi had made their choice. Across the galaxy on Earth, the news arrived like a thunderbolt. Captain Jake Morrison was in his quarters aboard the EFS Defiant when the emergency alert came through. He rushed to the bridge where General Patricia Hayes was already on the main screen, her face grim and set. Jake had served under Patricia for 8 years, and he had never seen that particular expression on her face before. It was the look of someone who had just received the worst possible news and was already planning how to deal with it. "Jake," Patricia said without preamble, "we have confirmation. The Krolathi Empire is sending a battle fleet to Earth. Intelligence puts their numbers at 200 warships, maybe more. They'll be here in less than a week." Jake felt his stomach drop through the floor. The Earth Defense Force had 12 ships total. 12 aging vessels that had been cobbled together from mining equipment, cargo haulers, and whatever military technology humanity had managed to develop in their short time among the stars. He thought about his sister Amy, who lived in New Seattle with her 2 kids. He thought about his parents in Chicago. He thought about the 8 billion people living on Earth who had no idea that an alien armada was coming to conquer them. "What are our orders, General?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. Patricia leaned back in her chair, and then she did something Jake had never seen her do before. She smiled. It wasn't a happy smile or a confident smile. It was the kind of smile worn by someone who had just decided to do something completely insane and didn't care about the consequences. "We're going to fight them, Jake. We're going to bloody their nose in space, and then we're going to drag them down to the surface. We're going to make them land their troops on our soil. And then we're going to teach these aliens something that every human knows from birth. What's that? Ma'am, Jake asked. That humanity doesn't know how to quit. Get the fleet ready, Captain. We're going to war, and we're going to make them regret ever hearing the name Earth. Patricia's smile widened slightly. You know what our species is really good at, Jake? We're good at killing each other. We've spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare. Now we finally get to use all those lessons on someone else. The Kralathi think they're invading a primitive world. What they're actually doing is walking into a trap, built by the most violent species in the galaxy. They just don't know it yet. Jake felt something stir in his chest. It wasn't hope exactly, because hope implied they had a chance of winning. It was something else. It was the same thing his ancestors must have felt at places like Thermopylae, the Alamo, and Stalingrad. It was the stubborn human refusal to go down without a fight. If the Kralathi wanted Earth, they were going to have to pay for every inch of it in blood. Yes, ma'am, Jake said. I'll get the fleet ready. And General Jake added one more thing. When this is over, when they realize what they've done, I want to be there to see the look on their faces when they figure out they just invaded the wrong planet. Patricia's smile turned cold. Oh, you'll get your chance, Captain. We all will. Now go. We have work to do and the clock is ticking. Earth is counting on us to give them a fighting chance. The Kralathi fleet moved through space like a swarm of steel locusts, their ships arranged in perfect military formation. Fleet Commander Zekthon stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. 200 warships, each one capable of reducing a city to rubble in minutes. The fleet had conquered 17 worlds before this one, and Earth would be no different. The humans had no shields, no plasma weapons, and their ships were laughably primitive. This would be the easiest conquest in recent memory. Zekthon reviewed the intelligence reports on Earth for what felt like the 100th time. The planet had a population of roughly 8 billion humans, spread across 7 continents. They had 12 military vessels, none of which posed any real threat to Kralathi technology. Their ground forces were armed with kinetic weapons that would barely scratch Kralathi armor. The invasion plan was simple and straightforward. Destroy the human fleet in orbit, land troops in all major population centers, and secure the planet within 48 hours. After that, the humans would have no choice but to accept Kralathi rule. What Zekthon didn't know, what none of the Kralathi knew, was what was happening on Earth at that very moment. The humans were preparing for war in ways the galaxy had never seen before. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Patricia Hayes stood in a massive war room surrounded by holographic displays and communication equipment. Around her stood representatives from every nation on Earth: the Americans, Chinese, Russians, Europeans, Africans, and every other group that had spent the last few centuries competing and sometimes fighting with each other. All of that was forgotten now. For the first time in human history, the entire species was truly united against a common enemy. Patricia looked at the faces around the table and saw fear, but she also saw determination. These were leaders who understood what was at stake. Gentlemen and ladies, she began, her voice steady and calm. We can't fight them in space. Our fleet will buy us time. Maybe bloody their nose a bit, but we all know how that battle ends. So we're not going to fight them where they're strong. We're going to fight them where we're strong. We're going to let them land, and then we're going to make them regret every meter they advance. Colonel Danny Foster from the United States Marine Corps leaned forward. You want to let them land, he said, his voice skeptical. You want to give up orbital superiority without a fight. Patricia shook her head. I want to invite them to land, Colonel. I want them to think Earth is easy prey. I want every one of those ships to put boots on the ground because every soldier down here is one less gun in orbit. We can't win in space, but down here on our streets in our cities, we've got a chance. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We know every trick, every tactic, every way to make an invader's life a living hell. General Chen Li from China spoke up next. What you're proposing is urban warfare on a global scale. The casualties will be catastrophic. Entire cities could be destroyed. Patricia met his eyes without flinching. If we surrender, we lose everything. If we fight and lose, we still lose everything. But if we fight and make it so painful, so costly, so bloody that they decide Earth isn't worth the price, then we win. I'm not talking about a clean war, generals. I'm talking about using every advantage we have. Our knowledge of the terrain, our experience with urban combat, our willingness to do whatever it takes. The Kralathi think they're invading a primitive world. They have no idea they're walking into the home of the galaxy's best killers. The plan came together over the next 72 hours. Civilians in every major city were evacuated to underground shelters that went deeper than any alien scanner could reach. Soldiers took up positions in buildings, sewers, and subway tunnels. Weapons of every type were distributed to military and civilian defense forces alike. Engineers rigged entire blocks with explosives that could be detonated remotely. Every advantage of terrain, every lesson learned from centuries of human warfare was about to be put to use. In orbit above Earth, Captain Jake Morrison gathered his small fleet. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Karen Wells, ran simulation after simulation, and they all ended the same way. Total destruction of the human forces within 3 hours. Karen looked at Jake with worry in her eyes. "Captain," she said quietly, "we can't win this. The math doesn't work. They outnumber us 20 to 1, and their technology is generations ahead of ours." Jake nodded slowly. "You're right, Karen, we can't win, but that's not our mission. Our mission is to make them commit. Make them think they've won. Make them eager to land their troops and finish the job quickly. Every soldier we can get onto the surface is one less weapon in orbit. We're not fighting to win up here. We're fighting to bring them down to our level." He opened a channel to the rest of the fleet, his voice broadcasting to every ship. "All vessels, this is Morrison. In a few hours we're going to face an enemy that outguns us, outnumbers us, and has technology we can only dream about. We're going to lose this battle. Let me be clear about that. But losing doesn't mean failing. Our job is to hurt them enough that they want revenge. Our job is to make them angry enough to come down to Earth to finish us off. Every Kralathi soldier on the surface is one less gun pointed at our planet from space. So we're going to fight hard, we're going to make them bleed, and then we're going to lead them straight into the trap. Earth is counting on us to bring them home, and by God, that's exactly what we're going to do." On the surface, in 1,000 cities across the globe, human soldiers prepared for the fight of their lives. In New York, Lieutenant Sam Carter checked his equipment for the 10th time. He was 26 years old, a graduate of West Point, and he had never fired a shot in anger before. Around him, his platoon did the same, their faces showing a mixture of fear and determination. Sam looked at his soldiers and thought about all the history he had studied. He thought about soldiers at Valley Forge, freezing and starving but refusing to quit. He thought about the defenders of Stalingrad, fighting for every building, every room, every inch. He thought about every underdog in history who had faced impossible odds and decided to fight anyway. "Listen up," Sam said, his voice carrying across the room. "Our ancestors fought off tyrants and invaders with nothing but guts and determination. Today we're going to show the galaxy what humans do when someone threatens our home. We're not the strongest species out there. We're not the smartest or the most advanced, but we're the most stubborn. And that's going to make all the difference." The Kralathi fleet emerged at the edge of Earth's solar system in perfect formation, their ships gleaming under the distant light of the sun. Fleet Commander Zekthon watched his tactical display as the human vessels appeared on the screen, 12 small dots against the vastness of space. His second officer, a veteran of 9 campaigns, actually laughed when he saw the human fleet. 12 ships, the officer said with obvious contempt. This will be over before it even begins. But Zekthon was more cautious than his subordinate. He had read the reports on human history, though he hadn't paid them much attention at the time. Something about endless wars and conflicts, species constantly fighting itself. It seemed wasteful and primitive to him. But now, as he watched those 12 ships accelerate toward his fleet, he wondered if perhaps there was something he had missed. He pushed the thought aside and gave the order to advance. The space battle began when the human fleet was still 2 million kilometers away. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the EFS Defiant, watching the enemy fleet grow larger on his screens. His hands were steady on the command console, his voice calm as he gave orders. "All ships engage at will. Target their forward screen. Concentrate fire on their command vessels. Make them think we're trying to win this fight." The Defiant shuddered as her main guns opened fire, launching magnetically accelerated projectiles toward the Kralathi formation. The other human ships did the same, their weapons flashing in the darkness of space. The Kralathi returned fire with plasma weapons that lit up space like miniature stars. The first human ship died within minutes, her hull torn apart by energy weapons that were simply too powerful to withstand. Jake watched the tactical display as his fleet danced and weaved through the enemy formation. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to survive long enough to make the Kralathi angry. Lieutenant Karen Wells called out damage reports as the Defiant took hit after hit.
Shields at 40%, she reported.
Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Port engine losing power. The battle raged for 4 hours, and it was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The human ships fought with a ferocity that surprised the Kralathi, using tactics that seemed reckless and desperate. They rammed damaged ships into Kralathi vessels. They detonated their own reactors to damage nearby enemies. They fought like cornered animals with nothing left to lose. One by one, the human ships were destroyed or crippled, but they took 12 Kralathi vessels with them. Jake watched as his fleet was torn apart around him. The Defiant had taken so much damage that half her systems were offline, and fires burned on 3 different decks. He opened a channel to the remaining ships. "All vessels, this is Morrison. You've done your duty and then some. It's time to go home. Abandon ship and head for the surface. We've got a war to win down there." The escape pods launched like a swarm of meteors falling toward Earth while the Kralathi fleet continued forward. Jake stayed at his post long enough to arm the Defiant's self-destruct system and point her nose at the largest Kralathi ship he could find. Then he ran for the last escape pod, his boots pounding on the metal deck as explosions rocked the dying ship. He made it to the pod with seconds to spare, slamming his hand on the launch button as the Defiant began to come apart around him. From his pod, Jake watched as the Defiant's reactor went critical and exploded, taking 2 more Kralathi ships with her in a ball of nuclear fire. He whispered a quiet prayer for his ship and his crew, then turned his pod toward Earth and prepared for re-entry. Behind him, the Kralathi fleet continued its advance, barely slowed by the human resistance. Sekthon surveyed the battlefield with mixed feelings. He had won, as he knew he would, but the victory had cost him 14 ships and nearly 3,000 warriors. The humans had fought with a savagery he had not anticipated, and their willingness to sacrifice themselves had been disturbing. But the battle was over now, and Earth lay defenseless before him. He gave the order for the invasion to begin. The Kralathi dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like a shower of falling stars. Thousands of them, each one carrying 100 elite soldiers in full combat armor. They landed in every major city on the planet: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow, Tokyo, Mumbai, São Paulo, Cairo, Sydney, and 100 others. The sky filled with alien ships, and for a moment the humans watching from their positions wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. In Manhattan, Lieutenant Sam Carter watched from his position inside an office building as the alien ship settled onto the streets and parks of his city. The rear ramps dropped and Kralathi warriors marched out in perfect formation. They were 7 feet tall, covered in armor that looked like it could stop anything, carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. There were hundreds of them, thousands, more than Sam could count. They moved like professionals, like soldiers who had done this 100 times before. Sam pressed the transmit button on his radio. "All units, hold fire. Let them get comfortable. Let them think we're scared. Nobody shoots until they're exactly where we want them." The Kralathi advanced into the city, their sensors sweeping the buildings for signs of life. What they found was nothing. Empty streets, abandoned cars, silence. Sub-leader Crethon, commanding the lead element, felt uneasy. He had expected resistance, fighting something. Instead, there was only the quiet sound of wind blowing through empty streets. He signaled his troops to advance cautiously, weapons ready. They moved 3 blocks into Manhattan before the world exploded around them. From windows, rooftops, sewers, and subway tunnels, the humans opened fire, not with energy weapons or plasma rifles, but with simple bullets, rockets, and explosives. The Kralathi found themselves in a maze of death where every building was a fortress and every corner hid an enemy. Crethon's armor saved his life as rounds pinged off his chest plate, but the soldier next to him went down with a bullet through his visor. The Kralathi dove for cover, returning fire at targets they could barely see. Their weapons tore through concrete and steel, bringing down entire walls, but the humans just kept shooting from new positions. Crethon tried to call for air support, but the buildings were too close together, the fighting too chaotic. His ships couldn't fire without hitting their own troops. All across Earth, in every city where the Kralathi had landed, the same scene played out. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to face them in open battle. Instead, the humans used the cities themselves as weapons, turning streets into kill zones and buildings into fortresses. 3 days into the invasion, Fleet Commander Zekthon stared at the casualty reports with something approaching disbelief. 10,000 Kralathi soldiers were dead, with another 20,000 wounded badly enough to require evacuation. His forces had not secured a single city, not even one neighborhood. Everywhere his troops advanced, they met resistance that defied all logic and tactical sense. The humans fought from positions that should have been indefensible, retreated through routes that shouldn't exist, and attacked from directions that made no strategic sense whatsoever. How is this possible? Zekthon demanded, his forearms slamming down on the command console. They're primitives with kinetic weapons. They should be fleeing in terror, begging for mercy. Instead, they're fighting like we've invaded their sacred homeworld. His intelligence officer, a younger Kralathi named Velkan, pulled up video footage from the ground. Commander, I think you need to see this. The screens showed human soldiers using tactics that the Kralathi had never encountered in 17 previous conquests. In one clip, humans disappeared into underground tunnels that their sensors couldn't detect, only to emerge behind Kralathi lines minutes later. In another, an entire building collapsed on a Kralathi company, and it was clearly deliberate. The humans had rigged their own structures to fall at precisely the right moment. Velkan switched to another video, this one showing a single human female in what appeared to be a sniper position. She fired once, then disappeared before their soldiers could even locate her position. The footage showed 30 Kralathi soldiers falling one by one over the course of an hour, each killed by a single shot from a weapon that should have been ineffective against their armor. Except the human wasn't shooting at their armor. She was shooting at the weak points in the joints and visors, places that required impossible accuracy to hit. They know exactly where our armor is vulnerable, Velkan said quietly. They've studied our equipment and found every weakness. In their tactics, Commander, they don't follow any conventional military doctrine. They fight to kill, not to win. They trade ground for casualties. They sacrifice positions to lure us into traps. It's like they've spent their entire existence learning how to fight wars, and now they're using all of that knowledge against us. In New York, Lieutenant Sam Carter huddled with what remained of his platoon in the basement of a building that had been a coffee shop 3 days ago. They had started with 40 soldiers, and now they were down to 28. But the Kralathi had lost over 300 trying to take these 3 blocks. Sam looked at the faces of his people, saw the exhaustion and fear, but also saw determination that hadn't wavered. Corporal Lisa Martinez came back from a scouting mission, crawling through a hole in the wall that connected to the building next door. Lieutenant, she reported, they're setting up for another push. Looks like 2 companies this time, maybe 300 soldiers. They're bringing up heavy weapons. Sam nodded and pulled out a hand-drawn map of the area. All right, here's what we do. We let them advance to the intersection of 5th and 42nd. Martinez, you're on the detonator for charges we placed last night. Chen, your squad takes the high positions in the buildings on the east side. Rodriguez, you've got the west. When they're in position, we light them up from 3 sides. Then we fall back through the subway tunnels to our secondary positions. What about the heavy weapons? One of the soldiers asked. Sam smiled grimly. That's what the charges are for. We're going to drop both buildings on them. The Kralathi love their firepower, so we're going to bury it under 1,000 tons of concrete and steel. Across the globe, similar scenes played out in every city where the Kralathi had landed. In Tokyo, Commander Yuki Tanaka led her forces in a defense that used the city's massive subway system as a network of tunnels and hidden passages. The Kralathi would occupy a street only to find themselves under attack from below. In Moscow, Colonel Viktor Petrov combined brutal winter weather with urban warfare tactics that had been refined over centuries of Russian military experience. The Kralathi found that their armor worked poorly in -30-degree temperatures, and their weapons became less effective as ice formed on the mechanisms. In Lagos, General Adewale Okonkwo organized a defense that used everything from modern drones to improvised explosives made from materials found in hardware stores. His forces didn't have the best equipment, but they had something more valuable. They had intimate knowledge of every street, every alley, every building in their city. They knew which roads flooded during rain, which buildings had basements that connected to old smuggling tunnels, which bridges could be collapsed to cut off Kralathi advances. The Kralathi were learning a painful lesson that conquerors throughout human history had learned before them. Technology and firepower meant nothing if you couldn't find your enemy. Superior numbers were useless if every street was a killing zone. Advanced armor didn't help if the enemy knew exactly where to shoot. The humans weren't fighting a conventional war. They were fighting a war of attrition, bleeding the Krolathi slowly, making them pay in blood for every meter of ground. General Patricia Hayes coordinated the global defense from her bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching 100 different battles unfold on her screens. She saw the Krolathi struggling against an enemy that refused to face them in open combat. She saw human soldiers using tactics that ranged from brilliant to brutal, from high-tech drones to simple pit traps. Every lesson learned from thousands of years of human warfare was being applied against an enemy that had no experience with this kind of fighting. An aide approached her station. "General, the Krolathi command is requesting negotiations." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "After 3 days, they want to talk." "What are they offering?" The aide looked at his tablet, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, they're requesting that we discuss terms of our surrender. They say this fighting is pointless and that we should accept the inevitable." Patricia laughed, a sound that held no humor whatsoever. "Tell them we'll accept their surrender anytime they want to leave our planet. Tell them they can go back to their fleet and jump back to whatever hole they crawled out of. Otherwise, they can stay here and we'll bury every last one of them in the rubble of our cities. Make sure they understand that this is just the beginning. We're prepared to fight for years if necessary. We'll turn every city into a fortress, every street into a graveyard, every building into a tomb. If they want Earth, they're going to have to kill every last human to get it. And we're very good at making that as expensive as possible." Back in Manhattan, Sam Carter watched as the Krolathi advanced into the kill zone. They moved cautiously now, having learned that carefulness kept you alive longer in human cities, but caution couldn't save them from what was coming. The Galactic Council reconvened an emergency session exactly 2 weeks after the Krolathi invasion of Earth had begun. Ambassador Vexnar was not present, having been recalled to the Krolathi homeworld in disgrace. In his place stood a new representative, an older Krolathi whose armor bore the scars of many battles. The chamber was silent as he approached the central platform, and every representative from every world watched to hear what he would say. "The Krolathi Empire wishes to announce its withdrawal from Earth," the new ambassador said, and each word seemed to cause him physical pain. "We have decided that the cost of occupying the human homeworld exceeds the strategic value of the conquest. Our forces will evacuate within the next cycle, and we will be pursuing diplomatic rather than military relations with humanity going forward." Thora of the Venetian Alliance listened as the ambassador continued with his report, and what she heard shocked her. The Krolathi had landed with 150,000 elite soldiers, the best warriors their empire could produce. After 2 weeks of fighting, nearly 60,000 of them were dead or wounded. They had not captured a single city, not secured a single strategic position. Everywhere they went, the humans fought them with a ferocity and cunning that defied explanation. The ambassador showed footage from the ground, and Thora watched in horrified fascination. Human soldiers fought from positions that should have been impossible to defend, used weapons that ranged from advanced to primitive, and employed tactics that seemed designed specifically to cause maximum casualties. In one video, a group of Krolathi soldiers pursued human fighters into a building, only to have the entire structure collapse on them. In another, humans used underground tunnels to attack from behind, disappear, and then attack again from a completely different direction. But what disturbed Thora most were the psychological reports from Krolathi soldiers who had survived the fighting. They spoke of an enemy that didn't know when to quit, that found new ways to hurt you even when they were losing ground, that treated death not as something to be feared but as just another weapon to be used. Some Krolathi soldiers were refusing to deploy to Earth, claiming that fighting humans was different from any combat they had experienced before. The humans, they said, fought like they enjoyed it. On Earth, Captain Jake Morrison stood in what used to be Times Square in New York City. The area was barely recognizable now, with collapsed buildings and burnt-out vehicles marking every intersection. Around him, exhausted soldiers celebrated as news of the Krolathi withdrawal spread through the human forces. But the celebration was muted because everyone knew what the victory had cost. General Patricia Hayes stood beside Jake, her uniform dusty and torn. She had spent the last 2 weeks coordinating the global defense, sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, watching as the casualties mounted. 20 million dead, she said quietly, her voice heavy with grief. 50 cities damaged or destroyed. London, Beijing, New York, Moscow, all of them in ruins. We won, but we paid a terrible price for that victory. Jake nodded, looking at the destruction around them. But we're still here, General. Earth is still ours. We didn't surrender, we didn't give up, and we didn't let them take our home. And every species in the galaxy just learned something important about humanity. Patricia looked at him with tired eyes. What's that, Captain? Jake gestured at the rubble-filled streets, at the soldiers moving through the wreckage, at the smoking ruins of buildings that had stood for centuries. We might not have the best technology in the galaxy. We might not have the biggest fleet or the most powerful weapons. But we have something that matters more than any of that. We have 5,000 years of experience fighting each other. We know every dirty trick, every brutal tactic, every way to make an enemy regret the day they decided to invade our home. The Kralathi came here thinking we were primitives, easy prey. They learned different. Across the galaxy, in the council chambers, Thora filed her official report on what was already being called the Earth Incident. She chose her words carefully, knowing that this report would be read by military planners and government officials on 1,000 different worlds. The humans of Earth possess limited technological capabilities compared to most spacefaring species, she wrote. Their weapons are primitive, their ships are slow, and their industrial capacity is modest. However, after extensive analysis of the Kralathi invasion, this office must recommend that Earth be classified as a Level 5 threat for any ground combat operations. She continued writing, laying out the reasons for her assessment. The human species has spent approximately 10,000 years in continuous warfare with itself. During this time, they have developed and refined combat tactics that are specifically designed for urban and guerrilla warfare. They possess an encyclopedic knowledge of how to defend territory against superior forces. Most critically, they demonstrate a psychological profile that is highly unusual among intelligent species. Humans appear to have a significantly higher tolerance for casualties and suffering than most other species, and they display a willingness to sacrifice themselves and their infrastructure if it means defeating an invader. Thora paused in her writing, thinking about the videos she had watched from Earth. She had seen humans rig their own buildings to collapse, destroying priceless historical structures just to kill enemy soldiers. She had seen them fight from positions that offered no protection, accepting certain death to buy time for their comrades. She had seen them turn their entire civilization into a weapon pointed at anyone who threatened their world. Her recommendation was clear and direct. Military engagement with Earth should be avoided under all circumstances unless absolutely necessary. Economic and diplomatic relations are acceptable and encouraged. However, any attempt to invade or occupy Earth should be considered a worst-case scenario. The human capacity for violence, adaptation, and sheer refusal to accept defeat makes them one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy when defending their territory. The Kralathi losses should serve as a warning to any other species considering military action against Earth. In the years that followed, other species would test that recommendation. Pirates looking for easy targets would raid human colonies. Small empires seeking to expand would look at Earth's limited technology and think they saw weakness. Criminal organizations would try to establish operations on human worlds. They all learned the same lesson that the Kralathi had learned. Humanity was not strong because of their technology or their numbers. They were strong because they had spent thousands of years fighting themselves, learning and perfecting the art of war. They knew how to turn cities into fortresses, how to use terrain to negate technological advantages, how to make every enemy pay in blood for every inch of ground. They knew how to fight outnumbered and outgunned because they had been doing it to each other for millennia. The galaxy had many species that were stronger, faster, and smarter than humans. But when it came to the willingness to do whatever it took to win, to sacrifice everything for survival, to turn entire worlds into battlegrounds rather than surrender, humanity stood alone. Earth had joined the galactic community not as victims or supplicants, but as warriors who had earned their place through blood and determination.